نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. We've been talking about some of the controversies, or rather the recent issues that people have been trying to bring up about the Prophet ﷺ, about the Sunnah, about the Seerah, so on and so forth. And what we discussed last week was the age of Aisha radiallahu anha. Specifically, we discussed the fact that what is established in the Sunnah and the Hadith in Bukhari and Muslim and Abi Dawood and elsewhere is that she was in fact 6 years old when she married the Prophet ﷺ and 9 years old when she moved in with the Prophet ﷺ. This is something which is in fact established within the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. And we went at length and we discussed some of the doubts that people wanted to raise, the reasons where these doubts come from, and why these doubts present a much greater problem than the one that they seek to solve. But now that we've done that, inshallah, I want to discuss the second part of this, which is, now that we accept it, the fact that Aisha radiallahu anha, she was in fact with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam from the age of 6 and then from the age of 9, how do we reconcile that with our societal standards? Because in our society, according to the relativistic moral value that is placed on marriage and relationships and so on and so forth, this is something which is incompatible. Marrying somebody at this age, in this society, in this day, in this age, is seen as something that is incompatible. So how do we as Muslims respond to this? What is the right way to respond to this? Obviously the wrong way to respond to this, like we discussed last week, is to say that it didn't happen and that she was in fact 18 or 19 or 17 or so on and so forth. And in fact, that doesn't even solve the problem, because by this society's standards, a person who is at the age of 50 something marrying somebody who is 18 years old is still considered something which is very looked down upon, correct? So obviously that doesn't solve the problem any more than what this would. But because this is seen as something being so much more egregious in this society, how do we actually answer this? What do we respond to it? And again, like we mentioned last week, this is something that prevents a lot of people from accepting Islam. And this is something which puts a lot of doubts in the hearts of Muslims that already believe. So it's important for us to be able to respond to this in a way that is sufficient, inshallah. And I've written down a few responses that I've compiled from several different places that I think are worth mentioning and going over. First and foremost, this is something that we discussed or we highlighted last week. It is that this contention was not brought up by earlier historians, meaning that it was acceptable in the age and the time of the Prophet ﷺ and in his society as well. Okay? This is the first thing. The first thing that we need to understand is that the society and time that we are living in is an aberration. It's far different than what mankind has lived through for thousands and thousands of years. The moralities, the values, everything that you teach and you preach and that you learn today is very different. This is perhaps the first time in human history and existence where we are living in the most atheistic age that you can imagine. Even before, when you go, you see that there have been Christians, there have been Jews, there have been Buddhists, there have been Hindus, there have been polytheists of various natures. There was always a concept and an idea of divinity that existed. People believed in God. And when people believed in God, there was something that was attached to it. There was the idea of morality being objective. Morality is something that is not determined by me, by you. It is not determined by arbitrary concepts that we've made up. For example, that do no harm. But then that harm is relativistic. How do I understand what that harm is? How do I understand how I define it? There have been philosophies that existed classically. You had the Epicurean thinkers of ancient Greece. Their idea was what? Their idea was very simple. You are supposed to live life trying to maximize pleasure and minimize pain. Very simple. And some of this idea still carries out, on today. I don't know if you guys seen that movie. It's called The Pursuit of Happiness, right? It's a great film in terms of the ideas that it tries to convey of struggling and providing for your family and so on and so forth. Not that I recommend watching films in general, and I saw it when I was very young, Allah forgive me. But the idea is enshrined even in the US Constitution and its early letters, right? The right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is something that is inherently part of Western civilization and culture. And it comes from some of the early Greek thinkers. But even as much as that is, independent, there's still a debate on whether or not these thinkers were atheists or not. And a lot of scholars, they say that no, they weren't. They had some concept of God, but it was kind of pantheistic and differentiated from, the idea of morality. And they were responded to by other classical Greek philosophers, like the Stoics, who didn't necessarily hold that belief, and they tied pleasure and all of these good concepts to the idea of virtue. And that virtue was something that was understood within the context of metaphysics and something which is divine. Most of human history, this is what the point that I'm trying to make, has been tied to the belief in some sort of supreme higher power. And that supreme higher power is what determines what is right and what is wrong, what we should do, what we should not do. Correct? And in the context of that, throughout all of these generations, throughout all of these societies from the East and the West, the age of marriage at this time was never considered something that was wrong or looked down upon. In fact, if there are some Christians that are bringing up this contention, then it's simply enough for you to respond and say that if this was done during any period of Christianity other than the modern period, any priest would have blessed this union and done the marriage. Because it's just a fact. We are the aberration. We have this tendency to see things from a very narrow perspective, like everything that you have inherited, this is what is right, and everything else is wrong. But if that is in fact the case, then this is logically incoherent, because all of us come from different places, all of us have different values, and it's not right that each and every single one of us, when we disagree with one another, is going to be right. Right? And it's the same, contention that many of these atheists, they'll bring up. They'll say, you believe in Islam only because you were born in Bangladesh or because you were born in Somalia. You don't believe in Islam because you have looked into its tenets. Well, we respond the same exact way back to them. We accept it, yes. Many Muslims are Muslims because they were born into a Muslim family and a Muslim culture and society. They have to go through that process when they become older and they become adults, where they actually reflect and they think about why I am Muslim and then actively accept Islam. Yes, they have to go through that process. The same thing applies to you though. When you bring up, I can't believe that Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, I can't believe he did this. Okay, why can't you believe it? Is it inherently wrong? Why is it inherently wrong? Because everything I know, everything I've inherited tells me that this is wrong. Who says what you've inherited is right? You're just reflecting where you came from, what you grew up knowing. But you yourself accept that that's not okay. You wouldn't accept me being a Muslim just because I was born that way, right? You criticize me for it. So why can't I criticize you for holding your beliefs without actively thinking about it? Whether it's right, whether it's wrong. It mentions, here's something interesting. In the Catholic Encyclopedia, it observes that the Virgin Mary, Maryam alayhi salam, that, quote, it is possible that Mary gave birth to her son when she was about 13 or 14 years of age. Okay? In Shakespeare's classic play, Romeo and Juliet, Juliet was only 13 years old when she was going to get married. Yet her mother tells her that, quote, ladies of esteem younger than her are already mothers. So we're talking about when? We're talking about the 1500s or so, 1600s? In the UK, here, in this land where we are standing right now, Shakespeare is writing, unless you believe it didn't exist. I know some I don't want any English like professors to get upset at me. But let's accept that he existed, and he's writing, and he's speaking within the context of this society, this very society which we reside in, and not during the time of the Dark Ages. This is well past the Enlightenment. This is when everything is changing. This is when all of the new thoughts that exist, the new philosophies that exist today, this is the root of all of that. In this context, he's writing, reflecting his society, and he's saying what? Ladies of esteem, meaning ladies of nobility and virtue. Before the age of 13, they're already mothers.